Well, my gosh, what a happening this is. I should have done a video. I now realize that. And not come because the pressure is too great. What a stunning event. What a stunning organization. Congratulations. I'm very, very impressed. I've never was not aware of what all of you are doing. I was not aware of the professionalism, the passion, the discipline, the search for learning that's going on here. And I'm privileged to be part of it. I'm nervous because I'm not very good at giving sermons. So I decided that I would not. That I would focus on my strength. And so unfortunately for you, this is going to be more like a business school class than an inspirational sermon. What I'd like to focus on today is something that most all of you are involved in, not only in your congregations, but also in your other lives, whatever those are, in your business lives, in your professional lives, and that's trying to do good in your community. And of course, what I've seen in congregations as I've studied a little bit and read a little bit about what you all are doing is virtually all of you have many, many activities where you're trying to benefit your own community, the members of your own community in various ways, and many activities in which you're trying to help other needy communities, communities that have needs. And of course, in this world today, we have overwhelming needs. And the question I'd like to talk a little bit about today is, how do you do well at doing good? How do you actually serve your communities effectively? Because what I've found, and I've tried this myself personally, I've found that it's really, really hard. It's not hard to do something. It's not hard to give away money. It's not hard to volunteer. That's easy. It's hard to do good. It's hard to be really effective. And these are precious resources that are in such need. We can't afford not to make our community activities, our service activities, our outreach activities, our social activities, we can't afford for them not to be effective. And so what I'd like to talk about today is some kind of strategic principles for thinking about what your congregation or your organization or your company is doing to serve the community, to see if we can find a way together to have more impact, to add more value. I'd like to share some of my personal experiences in doing this kind of work. I'd like to share some of the lessons that I've learned. I think the things I'll say today are applicable not only to your churches, but also to your other lives. My goal is that this session will hopefully be a little bit inspirational in kind of a different way. But my real hope is that all of you, with your colleagues in your organizations, will take this session as an excuse to have another discussion about the effectiveness of these kind of activities in your organization. And if that happens, I'll be very, very happy. I went on a bunch of websites over the last few weeks and just looked at the tremendous range of activities that your organizations are involved in. Speaking about congregations now, this is just a small sample. There seems to be a whole set of activities that many of you are engaged in that are focused on your own congregation and assisting your own members beyond the spiritual dimension per se. Many of you operate businesses, provide jobs, you try to help people get jobs, you provide help in circumstances of need, you see the list. Most of you are also involved in trying to help needy communities, both in your immediate area and also in other parts of the world. We see lots of efforts at reducing poverty, providing food, homeless shelters, disaster relief, healthcare initiatives. Lots of you are interested in HIV/AIDS and other healthcare issues in developing countries, and so on and so on. This is a very impressive list of activities that I discovered when I started looking. There is astonishing energy being put behind these activities by many of your organizations, if not all of them. I apologize, I don't know all of your organizations. I don't know you as a group. I know a lot about the auto industry, but I don't know a lot about this group. But it's astonishing what I found. Just peeling the onion a little bit and trying to understand the sheer magnitude of what all of you are doing. The commitment, the passion, the amount of volunteer hours, the money is truly amazing. This activity that you're engaged in is really one of the things that makes America great. I've worked all over the world, and one of the things I've found about America that's really, really unique is that we in America don't wait for government or somebody else to tackle hard problems, as they do in many parts of the world. If you have a problem in most parts of the world, they say, okay, government's got to come in and help. In America, we tend to want to solve our own problems, and we have this tremendous sense that we are responsible. And you personify that spirit, that greatness of America. And I know there's non-Americans here, and you, I hope, will carry this perspective to all the other parts of the world who badly need this same perspective. Churches can be really the front line of transformation of societies in so many different ways around the world. But I'll tell you, as impressive as all this activity is, my experience has been that we don't get the results that we should, if we're really serious, if we're really serious about measuring how well we're doing. What I find is that most organizations in these activities, whether they're churches or corporations or nonprofits, tend to get involved in a lot of different things that are very disparate, that are very reactive, that ultimately don't achieve the focus or the clarity to truly get good results. This is a tragedy. There's so many problems that we have to address. There's so many people in need. There's so many people that need health care. There's so many people that are in poverty or are suffering in a variety of ways. We can't just stop with the sentiment. We can't just stop by giving the money. We have to learn how to do this well. And in order to do this well, we need to apply some strategic thinking. What I find is that many of you have another life in business, many of you, not all of you, or in some other walk of life. And in that other walk of life, strategic thinking is kind of second nature. If you're in a business, you're thinking, what's my competitive advantage? How do I create a unique product? How do I deliver value in my business so I can survive in the marketplace? When we get into the world of community service and serving needy populations, somehow the strategy switch gets turned off. The emotion wells up, and we think about it totally differently. If we think about it systematically at all, we don't get the results that we could get. How do we do well at doing good? How do you make sure that your congregation's outreach and programs and services and giving activity is actually achieving good results? Well, the first thing I think we have to do is we have to shift the mindset. I think the mindset that many of us have when we approach this activity, and this is also corporations that are doing corporate social responsibility type activity, the mindset is the mindset of charity and philanthropy and giving. And what I would say to you is that's the wrong mindset. If you're going to try to serve the community, don't think about it in like that what you're doing is charity. Don't think about what you're doing as philanthropy. The right mindset is that when you're trying to assist and benefit your community, whether it's your own community or other communities, you've got to think of what you're doing is you're actually delivering a service. It happens to be a social service. It happens to be a social service to a customer, to somebody that you're trying to help. That's your customer. And you've got to figure out how to add value to that customer. And that imperative is just as great in trying to help your community as it is in trying to sell a product in the marketplace. How do we change this mindset towards our community activities, towards our social service activities? We've got to turn our minds around and approach this in a much more disciplined way. Again, I read through a bunch of websites about what congregations would describe as their community activities. And, I read a lot of those things, and when I was reading a lot of them, I got the sense that the community activities were more about the congregation than about the recipients. Oh, we feel wonderful. This is part of our, actualization. It makes us feel like we're, serving. Yes, of course. But ultimately, it's not going to achieve its purpose unless you think about it as from the point of view of the recipient. The act of giving is laudable. The act of charity is laudable. It's not an end in itself. We can't let ourselves fall into that trap. We've got to make sure that we achieve results. And what I can tell you is that as I traverse the world and I get involved in endless numbers of social programs and nonprofits and philanthropic efforts, what I find is that at best, you're ineffective. But at worst, you can actually do harm. I spent the last 15 years of my life working on issues of urban poverty. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And what I found is there's hundreds of organizations working on urban poverty, hundreds of, I'm sure, churches working on urban poverty. But if you approach urban poverty the wrong way, you can actually make it worse. And we've got to make sure that as we approach these issues, we don't think of the act of giving as valuable in its own sake. We actually think in terms of the results we're achieving. In order to do that, we're going to have to apply some strategy principles. Now, what are the kind of key questions we've got to answer? And I remember I said this is going to be more like a business school class than a sermon. Slides and all. We've got to really always ask ourselves 4 questions in our community activity. So this is kind of your agenda as a leader in your congregation. Let's kind of address these questions in our community activities. Number 1, have we really defined clearly what our goals are? What I find in nonprofits, goal definition is often the really big kahuna. If you can really get tripped up if you're not really clear about what your goals are. We'll talk about that in a minute. Number 2, what set of community services and community needs are we going to try to address? Where should we serve? What should we choose to do? What array of stuff? Again, if I looked at most of the websites that I had time to look at of congregations, it seems like more was better. Long list. More isn't better here in terms of getting results. It's predictable why you have these long lists. Because somebody comes up with an idea and says, I think we should have a homeless shelter. because I'm passionate about homelessness. And then somebody else puts their hands up and says, oh, gee, we should do a pregnancy counseling program, because I'm passionate about that. And there's a real tendency in organizations like this to just proliferate this stuff. End up doing lots of little things, none of which actually achieve any real benefit to the people, we're trying to serve. So we've got to ask ourselves, what are the real goals? What are we really trying to achieve? Where do we serve? In each area in which we're going to try to help, what's our strategy? We really have a clear strategy about how we're going to deliver value. Gosh, I don't get an answer to that question in many organizations. Oh, we're helping. Oh, yeah, but how? What's the model here? How are we delivering value? Why are we going to actually succeed? And then finally, how do we create alignment? How do we get the people in the congregation really aligned around these choices? How do we kind of get the organization to make choices? Again, in the area of charity and philanthropy and serving needy communities, choice is very rare. There's a tendency just to fire the shotgun and try to do a little of everything because it feels like you're doing good when actually you're dissipating precious resources that society desperately needs you to utilize well. It's a little bit like the video we saw earlier, applied to another big part of the agenda of any congregation. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about goals. A couple of simple points. Goals for serving the community may seem obvious. They're not obvious. What's the goal of a homeless shelter? Well, it seems obvious. The goal of a homeless shelter is to, house the homeless. But wait a minute. Do we want to house people for one night? Do we want to have people come and live there for years? Do we really want to actually try to help the people not be homeless anymore? What are we trying to do? What's our real goal? Now, all of those goals are potentially valid, but they would, of course, mean that you would do it very differently and you would approach the problem very differently. You see how goals matter? In nonprofits, you define the goals and the strategy at the same time. In a business, the goal is obvious. You got to make a profit. No profit, no survival, no business. The goal for every business, ultimately at the end of the day, is the same. For a nonprofit, the goal is discretionary. You've got to choose carefully exactly what goal you're trying to meet, and then develop a strategy to meet that particular goal. And for different organizations and different congregations, you can choose different goals, and therefore you're going to have to choose different strategies. Good intentions are not enough. We've already said that. The act of charity is not enough. Your obligation is actually to create value. And I'd like to define value for a social enterprise, for a congregation that's trying to do good work, as social benefits per dollar expended. And you're creating value if you can use the resources that you're going to commit to your social purposes. If you can use those to create more social benefit than other organizations could create. The alternative, of course, is just to give the money to a pro and let them do it. Find the most excellent organization in that particular field that runs homeless shelters and just give them the money and let them run the homeless shelter, rather than try to do an activity yourself. How do we set clear goals? I want to emphasize a very important point that I've emphasized many, many times with foundations and other philanthropies. And that is, when we're giving money and when we're donating time and energy to trying to address social causes, we have an obligation to society to use that money well. Society depends on us to use that money well. And by the way, if we're taking a tax deduction, Society's paying part of the cost. See, I find a lot of people that are giving, they think, oh, it's my money, I'm giving my money. Well, wait a minute. If you're taking a tax deduction, you're giving society's money too. Society is taking a ride with you in your charity. You better deliver value. Or we've made a bad bargain with society. We've got to be clear about the goals of our community service, our help, our doing good in each area. We've got to be very clear about them, and we're going to have to measure how well we do. Just like Bill earlier was talking about surveying in terms of, is the pastor, doing his job? Is the church doing its job in meeting the spiritual needs? We're going to have to be as disciplined about whether we're actually doing our job in meeting the community needs that we're trying to address. Now let's talk about those two choice questions that I mentioned earlier. Where do we choose to serve our community? And in each of those areas that we choose to serve, how do we go about it? Those are, in a sense, the kind of strategy questions that each of you leadership teams is going to have to address. And if you're a company and you're thinking about your social responsibility activities, you got the same two questions. Where do we choose to devote the company's energy in serving the community, in contributing to the community, and how do we go about it in each area? As you're listening to me, think about the stuff you're doing right now. Think about the ideas that have come forward for new initiatives and new projects in your congregation. Have we picked the right set of activities? Are we approaching each activity strategically? Now, in trying to decide where to serve the community, I guess, again, there's a trap. And the trap is that there are just literally thousands of worthy causes. And if you get a list of 100 people together in a room, you'll get a list of 100 worthy causes or more. Worthiness of the cause is not the basis on which you should choose what you do. All the causes are worthy. Many causes are worthy. This is a trap. We often find people debating whether AIDS care is more important than homelessness, or malnutrition is more important than violence, sexual violence. Wrong discussion. They're all important. As you think about what to do, that's not the way to choose about what's most worthy. Now, you can choose partly based on where your passions are, because those passions are going to have to do with your commitment, your sustainability to the endeavor. If your congregation has a critical mass of people that are really passionate about a particular activity, that's important to note. But the worthiness in and of itself is not the basis on which you should make these choices, for yourself as an individual or for your congregation. There are many unmet human needs. That's not the way to choose. You can't address all these needs no matter how hard you try, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much volunteer time you want to expend. Choosing where to serve your community as an individual, as a congregation, as a business leader, that's got to be based on, at least in my opinion, where can you add the most value? Social value. Remember that equation. Social benefit, which has to be defined specifically to what you're doing, homelessness, AIDS care, the social benefit per dollar expended, per resource expended. Let me just go slightly offline here. You may have a food bank, but if you actually calculated how much money you spend providing the food bank and valued the time and energy of the people involved, what if you found out that for every meal you served to a person that was in need, it cost $100? Shouldn't be doing it. Write a check. Send them to a restaurant. We don't tend to think that way when we're in the social service mode. We got to think that way, or we'll never be effective. You've got to choose where to serve based on where our particular congregation or us as an individual can add the most value, can create the most social benefit per dollar spent. Where can you do the most good with the resources you have? Assuming that there's going to be lots of areas where you have the passion, and the need, of course, is going to be substantial. How do we get to the kind of a strategic set of strategic choices about where we direct our community activities? Well, there's a series of questions each of you leadership teams ought to be asking. And really, each of you individuals ought to be asking. There's an external side. What are the most pressing needs of your congregation from a social point of view? Spiritual point of view, I'll leave that to you to figure that out, your pastor to figure out. But from a social needs point of view, economic, health, homelessness, pregnancy, violence, what are the most important needs? You've got to answer that question as rigorously as you can. What are the most pressing problems in other communities in need that you as a congregation care about? What are the most pressing problems? You've got to answer that question. What other organizations and institutions are available to meet those needs that you've identified for your community or for other communities? This is sort of a very critical question when you're taking the value perspective. Because if you can find another organization that's doing a great job, that's serving those needs in your community, probably the best thing to do is just to support them. We have a lot of tendency in this field of social service and charity to reinvent the wheel, to duplicate, to fragment, to have too many small, subscale, ineffective organizations rather than actually to scale the organizations that already work. And I would say that that's true to congregations as well. There's a lot of congregations that are spending a lot of time and energy doing stuff that somebody else can probably do better. Let's just bring them in. Outsource. The word of the day. The word of the decade. Really works. Works in this area too. So there's kind of an external analysis that I think each of your congregations needs to be doing, or some group, just to think about, what's the set of needs out there for us, for our community, given our circumstances, our location, our country, our region, our particular congregation, and so forth. Then there's an internal piece. What particular capabilities and resources do we have as a congregation? What kind of skill sets, what kind of relationships, what kind of access, what kind of companies do we have connections to? What kind of talents do we have access to? That's going to have a lot to do with which of these many, many needs that we identify we're going to take on. Where can we add value beyond good intentions? Where can we do more than just giving money? One of the most important questions that I believe all of us have to ask when we're thinking about, if you will, charitable or social service type work is, where can we do more than just giving money? And I would also say, where can we do more than just giving unskilled labor? It's great when a PhD finance professional goes out on the weekend and builds a house. It's great. It's an act of charity. Is that the highest and best use of that person's time to benefit society? It might be, but probably not. I don't go out and build many houses. I actually don't go serve at food kitchens. You know why? Because I can do much more good working with city leaders on dealing with inner city poverty strategies. That's where I choose to devote my personal resources and my personal time. And you congregations have to think about it the same way. Where can we do more than give money? Where can we, as individuals who are volunteers and spending time, where can we be more than unskilled labor? Where can we use our real skills to do good? Not just to do our job, whatever our normal job is. As I said earlier, we've also got to be careful that we understand where the passion is. Because if we're not picking areas where we've got passion and commitment, we're not going to sustain these community activities, these programs, these services very, very long. And then this is going to lead to a set of services. Every one of you as individuals and every congregation here has to ask the question, okay, what are we going to focus on? What are the set of community activities that we're going to engage in, both in our community and in other communities? What's the set? Based on answering these earlier questions, and can we get some synergy? You know, maybe if in our own community we develop some real capability in working with people on financial counseling or on pregnancy support, maybe that's an area where we should seek to benefit other communities. Maybe we should get some synergy between what we're doing for our own congregation and what we try to do to help other congregations. Let's think strategically about where we can deliver the most value. But another choice is going to be what other excellent organizations should we really contract with or support? See, there's a not invented here syndrome in charitable activity and community activity. You want to start up your own thing. It feels good to do that. It feels good to say, oh, this is our program, XYZ congregations program. You get your brand, on that program. You get to proudly list it on your website. There's a tendency to reinvent the wheel, not invented here, rather than simply support other organizations. How do we scale up over time the things that we're really good at so we can deliver really more value? Most congregations, I would assert, I can tell you that most nonprofits and most corporations that are thinking about social activities do too many things and achieve limited impact because they're not focusing and they're not applying their limited resources to their highest and best use. They haven't thought strategically about all this stuff. They've let passion and personal commitments and personal passions drive their choices rather than thought about value for society as a driver of their choices. In serving areas of serving the community, I found some areas of caution, some sort of pitfalls. Underutilizing volunteer capabilities. I once heard an impassioned presentation about a program at Shell Oil. And they were talking, and they were very much into environmental, beautification and these kind of things. And they talked proudly about how they had these petroleum engineers and other engineers that worked for Shell out raking the beach. Okay? And I was thinking, gosh, what could those engineers be doing that would use their real professional capabilities? Should we have a nurse out building houses on weekends? Probably not. That nurse probably ought to be giving her time as part of an effort to provide healthcare services to a needy population. Get the point? It's pretty clear, pretty obvious when you say it. You'd be surprised how few individuals and organizations think about their community activities in this way. Lack of focus is a problem. Agenda creep. If you don't define your goals very clearly, and if you really think it's more about you than about the social needs you're meeting, there's a tendency just to creep and do a little bit of more and more and more and more things. And you wake up and you've got 100 programs. And you're not really effective even in monitoring the ones that you're doing. Not invented here. Trying to create something where somebody else has already done it well and you should just be part of that. Imitating versus really differentiating a service or a program for your particular community, for your particular set of needs. These are some of the pitfalls that I see over and over and over again. How do we actually create social value in each particular area we want to operate in? Let me spend a minute on that. What if we want to really operate a homeless shelter? What if that's going to be one of our projects for our congregation? What if we want to get involved in HIV/AIDS treatment? How do we build a strategy for that? What if we want to address poverty in our community? How do we build a strategy for that? How do we think about that? Well, basically, the essence of strategy is how to create the maximum value, social value, for our target population. In order to think about that, the first thing we've got to do is again, avoid some other traps. When I talk about strategy with businesses or with any organization, there are really three very common mistakes that people make when they think about what a strategy is. It's very easy to confuse the strategy with the goals. So I often hear somebody say like, well, my strategy is to serve 1,000 families. Is that a strategy? I don't think so. I think that's just, what you're hoping to do. That's the goal. Strategy is how you're going to serve those 1,000 families to create value. How you're going to go about it. What benefits you're going to offer. My strategy is it's an employment program. My strategy is to create 250 jobs. Is that a strategy? No, that's a dream, that's a hope, that's an aspiration. So when we think about strategy, we can't get caught up in just repeating what our aspirations are. We also can't narrowly view strategy in terms of a specific action that we take. Our strategy is to build a new building. Well, that's not a strategy. That's hopefully part of a strategy that will overall achieve some results. And we also can't satisfy ourselves with very sort of high-minded statements of, purpose, like, our strategy is to serve. That's not a strategy. That's a sort of a inspirational statement. Thank you. These guys are good. How did he know that? Strategy is about how you are going to create value in this endeavor. Now, in order to do that, you've got to be clear about what are the goals for this particular endeavor. I spoke about a year ago to the directors of all the museums in America. Again, a humbling experience, with all these wonderful institutions we have in America. But they have a big strategy problem. Just like your social activities have a big strategy problem. And for a social service, strategy problems always start with goal definition. Think about it. What's the goal for a museum? If you were running a museum, what would be your goal? It's really complicated. I put on this slide just some of the types of goals that you might have. Your goal might be about collecting stuff and preserving it. Your goal might be around educating people about whatever the museum is all about. Your goal might be around having people have fun and just be exhilarated and happy to participate and experience, whatever it is that the museum is about. Your goal might be around scholarship and advancing the state of knowledge, for whatever your field is in the museum. All those are valid goals. They're all good. They're all possibilities. They're all worthy. The question is, which goal are you going to pick for your museum? Because each of these goals involves different sets of choices about how to configure what you do. And operate that particular program. And again, each of these goals is even more complicated. When you're talking about education, who you want to educate if you're a museum? Is it kids that you're focused on? Is it the sophisticated enthusiast that love art, modern art that you're trying to educate? Or it's the kids that know nothing about modern art. Who is it that you're really trying to educate? And so on, and so on. So whenever you have a program, a homeless shelter or a financial counseling program or whatever, and you're going to develop a strategy, the first place you got to start is to figure out, okay, what exactly is the goal here? What exactly do we want to do, specifically, our program? Not a generic, program, but our program. And that's kind of step one. Second step in developing a strategy for each area is to make sure that you have a solution model that makes sense. Now I'm going to be a little bit personal. I've spent about the last 14 years, I founded a nonprofit, a social enterprise called the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. And the reason I founded that organization is that I felt that the issue of urban poverty, which is where poverty in America is heavily concentrated, was really one of the most fundamental issues facing the country. This issue of inequality, of economic success and economic opportunity is a tremendously divisive problem facing our country, and we can see it starting to play itself out in this election cycle yet again. If we have this tremendous, some people doing really well, some people not doing so well at all, you create all kinds of stresses and strains in the society. You create pressures for lots of potentially bad things to happen in terms of policy. So I felt the issue of urban poverty was a fundamental problem facing the country. Founded an organization to try to address that problem. And then the first challenge we had was to figure out what is our goal. Seems obvious what the goal is. Turns out not to be so obvious. If you're trying to deal with urban poverty, the vast majority of efforts to deal with urban poverty had been really focused on poverty. And so most of the efforts were really actually social service programs to try to meet the needs of needy populations, like housing and child care and drug counseling and so forth. Now, I concluded that that was not going to be the goal for our organization. Why? Because I think those programs actually are not about reducing poverty. Those programs are actually about improving the quality of life in the short run. And if we really wanted to reduce urban poverty, we had to think differently. We actually had to, instead of thinking about reducing poverty, we had to think about how do we actually create income, jobs, and wealth. And providing social services was not actually going to address that goal. And what you see on this slide is really a transformation in thinking that's taken place in America over the last 15 years about how do we think about the problem of urban poverty. And I take some satisfaction in having a small part in this transformation. If you think about it as poverty, if you focus on the weaknesses in the community, if you think that the need is really social services in the neighborhood, you'll fail. The problem of urban poverty is the lack of a vibrant business space and job creation in and near urban communities. That's the root cause. And in order to build jobs and economic activity in urban areas, we can't focus on what's bad about them. we have to identify their inherent strengths. Because no business is going to come somewhere because of what's bad, of reducing what's bad. Businesses are only going to come to a location because there's some advantage of being there. And so we really had to identify, as crazy as this sounds, the competitive advantages of urban areas, inherent advantages, and build a strategy around that. And it's the long story I don't have time to tell about how the transformation of the process over the last 15 years in America to actually do this. This is a slide, don't try to read it. This is about Newark. This is about Newark, New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey is horribly economically distressed. But Newark, New Jersey is coming back now very strongly because a set of organizations like your congregations and others came together around a strategy to build on the inherent strengths of Newark as a business location and to address the barriers to realizing those strengths. It turns out that Newark had a tremendous untapped retail market because all the retailers in America had thought that all the poor communities were not a good market. And we were able to show that poor communities are actually a tremendously large market because the people are so densely populated that the purchasing power per square mile is greater than the most wealthy suburb. So all of a sudden, retailers are now building stores rapidly in urban, economically distressed areas, and each of those stores, almost without exception, employs massive numbers of community residents in the store. So you can see that when you're trying to address a social problem, you've got to be very, very careful that you've got a sustainable solution model. That you're actually working on doing something that will actually solve the problem in the long run, rather than just ameliorating a short-term need. We've got to ameliorate the short-term needs, and that could be our goal. If that's our goal, let's develop a program to do that. But let's not say we're trying to alleviate urban poverty and focus instead on meeting short-term standard of living needs. Let's be clear on the goal and the solution model. You know, I've been working for the last couple years on healthcare delivery, as Bill said. Boy, it's scary to talk to you. It's even scary to talk to doctors. I never forget the first time I had to give a talk about how to transform healthcare delivery to a bunch of doctors. But it turns out that doctors actually really care about helping people. And they're all tangled up in terms of the way the system works today. The system today makes it harder for doctors to help you be healthier. It confuses them. It draws them. It makes them less effective. So I wrote a whole book about that. More recently, I've been working on, okay, what do we do about AIDS in South Africa? How do we think about that? A lot of your congregations are interested in diseases in developing countries. Again, you've got to make sure, if that's what you want to do, that you're thinking about the problem with kind of a sustainable solution model. And this is going to require some homework. In global health, we've got lots of money going into global health right now. The Gates Foundation, President's commitment, activities from many folks like your organizations, but I am actually very, very, very depressed by how much value we're getting. The reason is we haven't yet understood how to look at the problem in a sustainable way. In global healthcare delivery, again, this is a whole session, but in global healthcare delivery, right now, the tendency is to think that the product is treatment. If we can just give drugs to more people, that's victory. And what we have to understand instead is the problem isn't treatment. The problem is health. How do we help people be healthier? Treatment is a vehicle for doing that, but treatment is not an end in itself. And if we don't wrap the treatment in a sort of a more systemic view of what's going on, then the treatment is probably going to fail. I think all of you know in HIV/AIDS now there's a relatively inexpensive sort of cocktail of antiretroviral drugs that work. It's a miracle. And it costs around $100 a year to treat an African, today with antiretroviral drugs. But it turns out that if that person that has HIV does not religiously take those drugs twice a day, then relatively soon, not only will those drugs not work, but that individual will develop drug resistance to the first cocktail of drugs, and then they'll have to get a more sophisticated set of drugs in order to go back and have any hope of being, well. And the second set of drugs costs $1,500 a year. So you see, the real problem is it's just not getting drugs to more people. The problem is actually compliance with the therapy. The problem is actually making sure that people take the drugs. So if you're giving money to a program, or you're trying to go a program that just hands out drugs to thousands of people, you think you're doing good. You actually may be creating drug resistance that is going to explode the cost and make it almost impossible for these people to ever get well. So again, we've got to be careful that we think holistically, that we have a solution model in whatever area, in homelessness, in healthcare, in poverty, in financial counseling, in dealing with people who have gambling issues. We've got to make sure that we think holistically about how we actually solve the problem. Number 3, as we develop our strategy, we've got to think systemically about what's the set of things that have to be done in order to address this social need. I have a concept called the value chain, which really is a way of thinking about how you organize yourself to deliver a service. What we find is the best social service providers really think about their value chain. Think about exactly how are we going to go about this? How are we going to structure ourselves, organize ourselves? What set of activities are we going to select in order to deliver the most value? In HIV care, you can think in terms of, again, a value chain. I already said that, if we can initiate drug therapy, but if we don't get compliance, we'll fail. We got to engage the patient. The best AIDS programs now actually have community health workers that literally go to the person's home every day and watch them take the drugs. And that turns out to be hugely cost effective. You wouldn't think so, but if you understand the whole value chain, the whole process, you'll understand that if you want to really get good results, you have to think about it that way. The best AIDS programs are not just AIDS programs. Because the best programs understand that you've got to deal with the other infections that are likely to pop up, like TB. Because if you don't deal with the TB, it'll defeat the purpose of the AIDS drugs. So you've got to manage that process of that value chain. Has got to include TB treatment. It's got to include concern for malnutrition. Because unless you address the set of things that matter, you ultimately won't succeed. This is the kind of rigor and thoughtfulness that has to be provided and put to bear as you think about your community activity. Charity is hard. It's hard to do well at doing good. It's easy to give. It's easy to give money. It's easy to feel like you're helping. Those are all worthy things. But if the goal for us ought to be to actually have an impact, that's hard. We've got to approach it strategically. Well, we're out of time. I have a number of other slides, and we could talk about those. You know, I insisted that I be able to control my slides, because I knew this would happen. It always does. My hope is whenever I give a presentation like this that all of you will go and download these slides. All of you will read through them again. All of you will look at the additional slides that I removed so that we could hopefully get through the basic concepts. This session today was not meant to be academic. It was meant to be a sort of a call to action for your organizations. I know you're doing these things. I know you're doing more of them now than you did 10 or 15 years ago. I know many of you have tremendous passion and commitment to doing good in your communities. My hope today is that you will step up your level. You will add a new level of strategic thinking. I thought it might be helpful to conclude with just a slide about the things that get in the way of strategic approaches to service, community service, or nonprofit type activity. And this is kind of my list of the sort of top 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever the number is. Number 1, lack of clarity and consensus on what our goal is. See, if you don't really define the goal of your community activity in homelessness or healthcare or whatever field it is, if you don't really define the goal clearly, anything is okay. You'll never make the choices that are necessary to be effective. We often have multiple conflicting or unclear goals for community service activity. Everybody's got their own opinion, and those opinions are not integrated into a consensus. And if there are multiple unclear, conflicting goals, you'll never be effective. The services that you decide to provide or the activities you decide to pursue are driven by donor or staff passions, not value or effectiveness. What I put forward here is a very different model that says that we make these decisions based on the value we deliver, not on just our personal preferences. You'd be surprised how rare that is. I can't tell you how many corporate CSR, corporate social responsibility programs, are really about the CEO's pet ideas. Not about any kind of coherent sense for what the corporation's overall objectives are. No attempt to measure performance. Just like that chart and that awful, tailing off that we saw earlier. We see very few community service activities actually trying to measure what's our benefit, how are we delivering, how much does it cost to deliver this service? It's going to cost us $150,000 with all the people and the materials and the time to build this house. If we actually hired a home building company, it'd cost them $75,000. Again, seen as an offensive question even, sometimes. But if our goal is really to benefit our community, we've got to ask those kind of questions. Limited attention to cost, inability to make trade-offs, decide who we really want to serve and not try to be all things to all people. Inability to stop anything. We start adding these little initiatives and then none of them ever get stopped. Very common problem. Indeed. In today's world, in today's America, in today's any country, government can't solve all the problems. It's not equipped, it doesn't have the money, it doesn't have the capability. It never could, but today, more than ever, government is not going to solve these problems, these social needs. We will have to solve problems in our communities. We will have to do everything we can to help solve the problems in other needy communities. It's up to us. I believe that very, very strongly. You leaders leaders must see positively impacting your community and addressing its social needs and addressing broader community social needs, you must see this as core to your mission. You can't just focus on what happens in church. I think we have an obligation to do more. Much more. It's your job as leaders to mobilize your organizations because they're effective, because they're passionate, because they can mobilize effort and commitment. It's your job to mobilize those wonderful organizations to do good outside of the church. But you've got to do this well. And to do this well, you're going to have to approach this part of your ministry, if I can use that word, with real strategic thinking. You're going to have to make clear choices. You're going to have to define clear goals. You're going to have to create alignment. You're going to have to persuade and cajole your congregation to really approach the question this way and not fall into all those traps I've been talking about. It's a privilege to be part of this group today. It's a privilege to talk about this subject about which I have great personal passion. I hope that out of this session will come a tremendous surge, both in activity in this area, but even more important in effectiveness. Thank you very much.